I think about that night more than I should. Not because I want to, but because sometimes, even when it's quiet, I still hear the sound. That low vibration under my feet, that pressure in the air. It's like my body kept something from that island I can't shake off. I wasn't even supposed to be there. It was one of those last-minute gigs. The agency called just before 5, said a guard had dropped out, and some other stuff about a high-profile client with tight confidentiality. It was just a night, all expenses paid kinda job, so I took the offer. They sent a car, then a boat. Nobody said a word the entire way, but it didn't bother me much. I figured I'd be babysitting an empty vacation house, the kind of quiet post where you drink cheap coffee and stare at motionless cameras until dawn. I wasn't expecting an island or a house like that. It didn't even look real when we got close, just glass, lights, and silence, perched over the ocean like it didn't care if the waves ever touched it. There were palm trees, sure, but they didn't sway. There was wind, but only around us. Not a single leaf moved on that island. The guy who met me at the dock didn't smile, just scanned me up and down like I was a piece of equipment being dropped off. He walked fast and I kept up, with the stone paths. Lanterns glowing but not warm, it all looked perfect, but it didn't feel that way. Something about it felt rehearsed. I was led through a long hallway, white walls, polished floors, no artwork, no fingerprints. I remember thinking how expensive everything looked, but I also noticed how far apart the doors were. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place built to keep things in. They told me I wouldn't be needed between midnight and 4. Just told me like it was standard protocol, and oddly insisted I could rest. Which was strange. My job was to stay alert, not take naps in a stranger's house, but I didn't say anything. I was handed a drink, something golden and fizzy, and thanked them. It smelled off, like something sweet trying too hard. I held it to my lips but never let it in. The room they gave me was down a quiet corridor near the east end. No footsteps behind me, no ambient sound, just the distant, rhythmic ticking of my own heartbeat. The suite was pristine, so pristine it didn't even feel touched. The bed was made tight, windows from floor to ceiling, but no curtains. The ocean was out there, wide and black, but somehow flat, like the water was there for show. I sat on the bed, still in my uniform, drink on the dresser. I waited. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel awake either, just suspended, like time didn't know what to do with me. Midnight came and went. I expected something, a sound, movement, a knock on the door even, but nothing came. And that was worse. There's a kind of silence that feels peaceful. This wasn't that. This was the kind that feels intentional, like something is holding its breath, waiting. The lights dimmed without me touching a switch. My phone lost signal without warning. No Wi-Fi, no network name, just a black bar and a blinking clock. That's when the hum started. It wasn't loud at first, not sharp, just low, like something heavy dragging under the house. At first I thought it was wind, but it didn't stop, and it didn't change direction. It just pulsed, like a living thing breathing beneath the floors. The glass on the dresser quivered. I stood up slowly. My legs didn't feel like they were under me anymore. My instincts were awake, and that deep, buried part of your brain that doesn't speak in words. It just tells you something's wrong. Don't move, or maybe move now. I opened the door. The hallway was colder than I remembered. Not freezing, just thinner, like the air wasn't quite finished being air. I didn't call out, I didn't even think to, I just listened. And what I heard, it wasn't music, it wasn't voices. It was something else. I stepped into the hallway, not even sure what I was looking for. The lights were dim, not off, just low enough that the shadows had started blending with the walls. My footsteps didn't echo. The floors should creaked, but they didn't. Nothing in that place moved unless it wanted to be noticed. I passed 3 doors, all closed. One of them had a faint glow under it, like a candle was burning inside. I don't know why, but I didn't stop. My eyes kept going, but my chest had already started to tighten. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was that feeling you get when you're walking through someone else's house in the middle of the night and realize you don't remember how many steps it takes to reach the kitchen. Except this wasn't someone else's house. This was something else entirely. I made it back to the main corridor, the one they'd brought me through earlier. It should lead to the terrace. I remembered counting 5 paces from the foyer to the glass doors, but now it kept going. Just hallway, no windows, no doors, just the same warm light stretching farther than I remembered. At one point, I stopped to check if I'd somehow gotten turned around. But when I looked behind me, the hallway behind me was shorter than what I'd just walked, as if space was shifting when I wasn't watching. I didn't panic. I just stood there, heart packing, trying to reason with myself. Maybe there were 2 identical wings. Maybe I made a wrong turn. But I hadn't. The hum I'd heard earlier was stronger here. Not louder, but clearer, like I was getting closer to whatever was making it. And that's when I noticed the wall. One panel on the right was slightly off color. Not a door exactly, but a thin seam running floor to ceiling, just wide enough to suggest there was something behind it. I don't know why I reached out. I just remember the temperature changed as my hand got closer, like the air around it was a degree or 2 colder, dense, and almost vibrating. I didn't push it open. The wall shifted on its own, just a few inches enough for me to see the edge of a room that wasn't meant to be part of the tour. There were no lights, no furniture. Just rows of mirrors, tall, thin, antique-looking. But what made me freeze was that they didn't reflect anything. Not me, not the hallway, not the soft light behind me. Just nothing. Like the glass was there, but the world behind it wasn't real. I stepped back slowly. And as I did, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. One of the mirrors shifted. Not the frame, not the wall. The glass itself. Like something inside had moved. That's when the hum stopped. All at once. And the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was pressure. Like whatever had been humming was now listening. I stood there completely still, feeling watched by something that had no eyes. As I walked, I began noticing subtle but strange repetitions. I passed a sculpture I was sure I'd already passed minutes earlier. Same angle, same spotlight, same scuff mark on the pedestal's base. I turned the corner and passed it again. My mind was trying to be rational. Maybe the interior design just mirrored itself. Maybe it was meant to disorient visitors. But part of me already knew that wasn't the explanation. Eventually, I turned down a quieter hallway, narrower than the others. The lights were dimmer there, more golden. A few steps in, I saw someone ahead of me, one of the staff, dressed in white, walking slowly in the same direction I was heading. At first, I almost called out, thinking I'd ask how to get back to the main entrance. But something stopped me. It wasn't just that they didn't notice me. It was how they moved. Their pace was too steady, their arms resting unnaturally straight at their sides, their posture too controlled. They didn't turn their head once, just kept walking in a slow, measured line, as if they were following marks on the floor only they could see. I stepped quietly, keeping my distance, trying not to make noise on the polished floor. When I reached the point where I thought they'd turned left, I found nothing, no side door, no visible exit, just a blank wall. The corridor ended there. They were gone. That's when I noticed the faint blue glow leaking from a half-open door on the right. It wasn't marked. Nothing on it indicated a staff area or restricted zone. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The room inside looked like a small command center, softly humming machines, mounted screens, cables running neatly along the baseboards. No one was there, but the monitors were on. Some showed hallway feeds. Others showed camera angles from rooms I hadn't seen yet. One of them looked like a soundproof chamber. Another was dimly lit with what looked like rows of books or files. Then I saw it. One screen in the lower corner displaying a hallway I recognized. I saw myself walking through it. But the timestamp said 12:34 a.m. I looked at my phone. It was 2:06. At first I thought it might be a recording, some kind of security playback. But as I watched, the version of me on the screen paused just like I had and turned toward the same sculpture I'd seen twice. Then he kept walking. Same direction I had. Same angle of turn, but just slightly out of sync. On another monitor, I saw the staff member I'd just followed. They were now sitting in a chair, alone in a brightly lit room staring forward. Their expression was blank. Their hands rested flat on their knees. They didn't blink once. I stepped back from the screens, not sure what I was looking at anymore. The entire villa felt like it had shifted while I wasn't paying attention, as if my presence wasn't just expected, but part of a larger schedule I hadn't been informed of. I started to feel less like a guest and more like a variable. Not someone working the night shift, but someone who had been inserted into a program already running. One that didn't require my understanding, only my participation. Whatever this was, I hadn't interrupted it. I walked right into it. I didn't stay in that room long. I couldn't. Something about the way the screens moved, the lag, the slow loop, the silence, made my skin feel tight. Like I'd stepped into the control room of a place that had been watching me long before I stepped onto that island. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small vent along the baseboard near the back wall. It looked like ordinary ventilation at first, but then I caught it, a draft, steady and cold, pushing out from a thin gap in the floor just beneath the rack of monitors. I crouched and felt along the paneling. The seam was almost invisible, but there was a catch, a small pressure plate, or maybe just a loose panel built to give if you knew where to push. I didn't think. I pressed. It clicked. The floor shifted with a low metallic groan, revealing a hatch, one that opened downward into darkness. No stairs, just a ladder built into the stone. It didn't make sense, not for a villa like this. This wasn't a maintenance hatch or emergency exit. It was too deliberately hidden, too far from the rest of the house. I should walked away. I knew that. But there's a certain kind of curiosity that overrides fear, the kind that doesn't come from wanting to know what's down there, but needing to know why it was hidden in the first place. I climbed down. The air changed almost immediately. It was cooler, drier, and filled with a faint scent of dust and stone. The ladder ended after about 20 feet into a narrow passageway barely tall enough to stand upright. The walls weren't polished like the villa. They were raw, textured, older. Like this tunnel had been dug long before the glass house above it had ever existed. It was quiet. No hum, no vibration, just silence and the low echo of my own breath. I moved slowly, one hand brushing the wall, the other hovering near the flashlight app on my phone, even though I hadn't had signal all night. I figured the screen might still work as a light source if things got darker, but I didn't need it. Dim bulbs were strung along the ceiling, spaced every 10 feet or so. Not bright, but enough to see. This wasn't abandoned. It was maintained. The path stretched far longer than I expected. I kept thinking it would curve or end, but it didn't. Just straight. Slight slope downward. Every so often I'd see a junction, small doors sealed shut, no labels. One had an old keypad next to it, blinking red. The further I walked, the more the feeling of isolation settled in. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was more like I had left the part of the world where I was allowed to ask questions. Eventually, I reached a branching hallway. To the left, darkness. To the right, more dim bulbs and something new sound. Not loud, not distinct, just movement. Like chairs being shifted, papers being sorted, soft voices bleeding through thick walls. I followed it. At the end of that corridor was a heavier door, steel, matte black, no handle but slightly ajar. Light leaked through the crack, warm light. The kind you find in a boardroom or a private lounge. The air coming through was cleaner, almost curated, like it had passed through layers of filtration. I hesitated, then leaned in just enough to look. What I saw was not what I expected. No cages, no altars, no flickering candles or blood rituals, nothing cinematic. It was a room. Large, quiet, clean. Wood-paneled walls, long oval table in the center surrounded by high-backed chairs. Half were occupied. Men and women mid-conversation dressed in suits or simple designer clothing. Their movements were calm, professional, controlled. It looked like a conference. But no one had notebooks. No one had laptops. And everyone in that room looked familiar. I couldn't place all the faces, but I'd seen them before. On television, on magazine covers. A few were more obvious than others, high-level figures from tech, entertainment, government, people with recognizable voices, faces you don't forget. They weren't hiding, they weren't performing. They were discussing something in low tones, too quiet for me to hear, pointing occasionally at a screen on the far wall which displayed a map, then switched to a set of names. No titles, no context, just names in white on black. I didn't see mine, but I didn't see all of them. I stayed there frozen, watching these people move like this was routine, not an emergency, not a crisis, a scheduled meeting, hidden just beneath the surface of someone else's paradise. I didn't know what scared me more, that I had found them, or that they didn't seem afraid of being found at all. I didn't move for a long time, just stood there behind the door, heart packing slow but heavy, watching that room fill with quiet movement. It was nothing like the stories. No cloaks, no firelight, no chanting. If anything, the ordinariness of it was worse. The people in that room weren't pretending to be anything they were. They were confident, casual, as if the fact that they were down here, hidden away beneath a private island, didn't need to be explained. Every few minutes, someone would enter through a side passage, no knocking, no announcement. Just a nod, a glance, a slow pull of a chair. No one greeted each other. There were no name tags, but the way they arranged themselves, how certain people were always given the middle seats, how others waited before speaking, told me everything I needed to know. There was a structure, a hierarchy, and it had been followed many times before tonight. At one point, the screen on the far wall shifted again. It flashed a grainy satellite image, then a list of numbered phrases. Each line disappeared as quickly as it appeared, replaced by another. There were no details, no explanations, just enough to suggest something strategic, global, coordinated. The quiet hum of voices continued, short, controlled phrases, not arguing, aligning. It was the sound of people who didn't need to convince each other of anything. I recognized one man sitting at the end. I won't say his name, but I'd seen him on television less than a week ago shaking hands in a press photo, smiling next to a head of state. In that room, he wasn't smiling, just listening, focused. Like this meeting mattered more than any of the cameras he'd stood in front of all year. There was a woman next to him, younger, maybe late 30s. I remembered her from a luxury brand campaign years ago, someone who'd faded from the spotlight. But here she was, nodding along, marking something with a pen on a notepad that was handed to her mid-conversation. The air around her felt heavier somehow, like people paused when she did. The strangest part was how still the room was. There was no music, no background noise, no hum of AC. Just the soft clink of glasses, the faint shuffle of shoes, and occasionally the muted tap of fingers against wood. These weren't people rushing to make decisions. They were calibrating. The longer I watched, the more a question settled over me. How many of these meetings had already happened? Not just here, but in rooms like this. Rooms buried under other villas, under foundations of buildings we walk past every day. Rooms no one ever photographs. Rooms no one ever leaves through the front door. My hands were damp. I hadn't even realized how tightly I was holding the door frame until my knuckles started to ache. And then the conversation paused. Not because someone raised a hand or called the room to order. It just stopped, like they'd all received the same unspoken cue. The screen faded to black. Everyone stood. That's when I heard the second door open, a narrow one on the side just opposite from where I was hiding. A figure stepped through, not rushed, not forced, just guided. It was. She had on a crown that read Queen of the Universe. I'm not sure if she meant it literally or figuratively, but it scared the hell out of Mem. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. She walked calmly to the center of the room and stood there, not like she'd been told to, but like she'd done it before. No one explained her presence. No one acknowledged her aloud. She was just there, and that seemed to be enough. Someone handed her a small object. I couldn't see what it was. She held it in both hands, eyes down. Then she looked up just briefly, and for a second I thought she saw me. But she didn't react. A man approached her, whispered something near her ear. Whatever it was, it didn't surprise her. She nodded, then turned and walked back through the door she came from. And just like that, the room returned to motion. Another map appeared on the screen. Another line of text, another round of whispers. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just an ordinary meeting. Matters in top niches are being deliberated, and here, whatever happens on camera is just a replay of whatever has been decided. These people weren't here for one night. They'd been here before. They'd do this again. I pulled away from the door carefully, back into the hallway, trying not to make a sound. My breathing was shallow now, controlled, like my lungs were trying not to alert the walls. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay near that door. I moved back the way I came, retracing the narrow corridor with slow, steady steps. My mind was running, not panicked, not yet, but trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Not just the people or the girl, but the way the room functioned. The silence, the precision, the complete absence of chaos. It wasn't the kind of power that roars. It was the kind that doesn't need to. I turned a corner too fast and almost slipped. There. I knew I should backed away. I should turned around, retraced my steps, climbed that ladder and left the way I came. But I didn't. I stood there, still watching, as if some part of me needed to know how far this went. Maybe I thought I could make sense of it. Maybe I just wanted confirmation that what I was seeing wasn't a dream. I kept thinking, if I could just see one more clue, one more interaction, I'd understand why this place existed. But then something changed. A man entered the room, not through the tunnel, but from behind where I stood. I didn't hear him until I felt it, that sudden shift in the air behind you when someone steps too close. He didn't touch me, didn't speak, just stood there waiting as if this part was already expected. I turned to face him. He gave me a nod. That was it. A simple, practiced gesture, and then he started walking, not forcing me to follow, not even checking if I did, just trusting I would. And somehow I did. He led me down another narrow corridor that branched off from the tunnel, one I hadn't noticed before. The walls were different here. Clean, white, no pipes, no stone. It felt like stepping into a completely separate structure. After a few turns, We reached a small, windowless room. There was a single chair in the center, a table against the wall, and a screen embedded into the paneling above it. Soft white light, no sound. Everything about the space was designed to calm, not intimidate, control. He motioned for me to sit, then stepped out. The door closed behind him. I didn't hear a lock, but it didn't need one. A soft tone played. The screen came to life. Just a video feed. It was me, standing in the hallway of the villa earlier that night, turning toward the sculpture just like I had. Then another feed. Me again in the guest room sitting on the bed. Another walking behind the staff member. Another pausing outside the control room door. Different angles, different timestamps, all real, all recent. Then the screen split into two. On the left, a still image, a document. My agency ID, contact info, social accounts, training history. Even photos of my old apartment, ones I never took. Surveillance quality. On the right, a blank space. Slowly, words began to type themselves out. Not typed, rendered like they were part of a presentation. You followed pattern. You responded to control. You maintained self-regulation under uncertainty. Then it paused. You passed. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that. I didn't know what it meant. Past what? Then another line appeared. Would you like to proceed to phase 2? I didn't answer, didn't even move. After a moment, the screen faded, the lights dimmed, and a compartment in the wall opened silently. Inside, a tablet device and a folder, plain black, no markings. I didn't reach for it. I stood up slowly and stepped back. The door opened without a sound. No one was waiting outside. I walked back the way I came, heart pounding now, not from fear of what I'd seen, but from the slow, terrible realization that my being here wasn't a mistake. It wasn't random. I wasn't just hired for a night shift. I was observed, tested, profiled, and now I'd been acknowledged. I expected someone to stop me as I walked back through the tunnel. But no one did. There were no guards, no alarms, no barriers, just empty corridors and that same quiet hum, low in the walls, like the villa was exhaling after a long night. When I reached the hatch, the ladder was still there, still open, still waiting. Climbing up felt harder than it should. My hands moved, but part of me was still below, in that chair, in that room, under that screen. I don't know how long I'd been down there. Maybe an hour, maybe longer. Time had lost its usual rhythm. When I stepped back into the villa, everything looked untouched. Lights back to their soft glow. Music humming low from a speaker somewhere. The hallway smelled faintly of orchids again, like nothing had ever shifted. No sign of the man who led me. No sign that anyone knew I had seen what I saw. The guest room was just as I left it. My bag was packed. My phone sat on the pillow. Back to full signal. 4 bars. Notifications rolling in like it had never been out of range. The drink was still on the nightstand, still cold. At 7:00 a.m., I walked out the front door. The same man from the dock was waiting. Same white shirt, same silent nod. He didn't ask how my shift went. He didn't say a word, just stepped aside so I could board the boat. The island shrank behind me as we moved across the water. I didn't look back. I told myself it was over, just a job, one strange night, a contract no one would talk about again. But halfway to the mainland, I reached into my bag and found something I hadn't packed. The folder. Same matte black cover. No labels. Just sitting there beneath my jacket, placed so carefully it could only been intentional. I didn't open it. I still haven't. But that night, after I got home, after I showered, after I tried and failed to sleep, I couldn't. It was like I traveled into space and I left a huge chunk of me behind. I still don't know what to make of everything that happened, but I know something happened to me. I randomly still get weird reminders on my phone asking if I want to proceed to phase 2, and I know where that comes from. It's scary than you all think. Like I constantly have my life on a ticking time bomb waiting for the right time to explode. And maybe one day, it would explode and it'll be gone like I never existed. I don't expect you to believe everything I said. Honestly, I wouldn't believe it either, not if I hadn't lived it. Not if I didn't still see the signs, feel the shifts, hear that hum when the world gets too quiet. But if any of this sounds familiar, and maybe you've been in a similar situation before, leave a mark below. Tell me what you would done. Tell me if you'd opened the folder. And if you've heard whispers like mine. Like, share, subscribe. Just in case I don't get to tell the next one myself.